Hello and welcome everyone. We're here to talk all things climate. I'm Miriam Gray and I'm live in the World Bank Group headquarters here in Washington, D.C. Now in just over 2 weeks from today, COP26 will kick off in Glasgow, a major moment which could send a decisive signal about how the world will tackle the climate crisis. While climate change may be a global challenge, the battle will be won or lost in individual countries. The actions they take now and the policies they put in place today hold the key to low-carbon, resilient growth for the future. So today we are inviting you on a journey to see what climate action actually looks like around the world. You will be joined by a host of guests, from real climate solution activists to global leaders and prominent climate advocates. We've got so many great guests coming up, and to kick us off, the president of the World Bank Group, David Malpass, invited two global leaders to share their thoughts on how to make climate action count. In this first conversation, he is joined by President of Colombia, Iván Duque, and in the second, Mark Carney, the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance.
Thank you, Miriam. Welcome everybody to our discussion. I'm very pleased to be joined today by President Iván Duque to discuss Colombia's approach to climate change. Climate change is, of course, a global challenge, but the battle will be won or lost in individual countries. It's not an equal battle. There are advanced economies that have historically emitted most of the world's man-made greenhouse gas emissions. These countries need to significantly step up every effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and extend support to the rest of the world. There are the world's poorest countries, IDA countries, that account for less than a tenth of total man-made greenhouse gas emissions, where we need to see investments in adaptation and climate-resilient infrastructure and in low-carbon energy at scale. And there are countries like Colombia, middle-income economies that were hard hit by the crisis. As they recover, they also need to think about the significant climate-related impacts they face and how to contribute to global efforts on mitigation while investing heavily in adaptation too. President Duque, very glad you could join me today. I'd like to welcome you to share your insights into how Colombia is thinking about reducing emissions and delivering on adaptation and becoming a climate action leader. So welcome. I know these are very hard efforts. I wonder if you'd give us a general perspective on Colombia's plans in this area.
Well, thank you so much, President Malpass. It's great to be here with you, David. Not only my admiration, but gratitude, because we know how much you're doing for the countries around the world in order to face not only the crisis that has been derived from the pandemic, but also how do we recover our economies and how do we do it in accordance with the principles that we must meet in order to reach what we call the highest reduction of CO2 emissions in our history on carbon neutrality towards 2050. So I'll begin by saying that, yes, we're heading to Glasgow, and we're heading to Glasgow with a very bold promise and objective to be reached. The first one is that we want to reduce by 51% all our greenhouse gases emissions by 2030. And we've also set the goal that we want to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. Those are the two major goals. So yes, we're talking about carbon neutrality, but something that is also important, David, is that we're talking about nature positive policies. Carbon neutral, nature positive policies. And by that, we have set the goal of zero deforestation by 2030, and something that is more important, which is to reach the 30 by 30 compromise of having 30% of the Colombian land or territory to be protected area. So considering that those are the major goals, the question is, how do we plan to get there? First thing to say, energy transition. When my administration began, we only had 35 megawatts of installed capacity in non-conventional renewables. That was 0.2% of the energy matrix. By December 2022, we'll have more than 2,000 megawatts of installed capacity in Colombia. So that means we will pass 14% of the installed capacity, and we're heading the road to reach 20% very, very fast. And we even might get higher on that ambitious target because we're having a new auction that is going to have projects for at least 4,800 megawatts to be installed in the next 4 years. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is what we call clean mobility. I was the co-author of the bill that passed through Congress and that allowed Colombia to have incentives so that we can have a replacement in the car fleet around the country. And we had a goal to get to 6,000 vehicles before the end of my term. And we're reaching this target by the end of this month. That means that electric vehicles in Colombia are growing. And something that is also very significant, we have consolidated the biggest cargo and passenger fleet in Latin America and the Caribbean with electric vehicles. The third element, circular economy, producing, conserving, conserving, producing. We're getting to zero deforestation agreements with multiple sectors in Colombia, but we're also encouraging the private sector to take a lead in water management, waste management, and something that is also aligned with a goal that we have set with the 1 Trillion Trees Initiative. Help us plant 180 million trees by August 2022. The other thing that I should say, and this is the fourth very important element, is that we want to reach the 30 by 30 initiative, 30% of the Colombian land being a protected area. We're now at 22%, and we hope to meet that target by no longer than August next year. I know it is very ambitious, but we have to reach that target, not only thinking about the oceans, but also thinking on land protected areas. And I should also mention something that is very important, the protection of the Amazon, the Leticia Pact, and the compromise that we have in order to build nature-based solutions and pay for environmental services. These 5 components, David, are the cornerstone of the objectives that we have set in order to meet the 2050 carbon neutrality nation positive target, but also have a 51% reduction on CO2 emissions by 2030.
President Duque, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. And it sounds like huge challenges, and you've got a clear direction of where you're going on them. I appreciate it. Thanks. Hello, I'm glad to be back and here joined with Mark Carney. He doesn't need much introduction, but I'll remind people he was the head of 2 different central banks, Canada and the United Kingdom. That's a huge job right there. Also head of the Financial Stability Board. And for those involved in climate, he needs no introduction. He's been hugely involved for years in this issue of how do we get enough financing to actually have an impact on climate change. So Mark, thank you for being here. And I'm interested in that question. Where do you think we are currently on the idea of the amounts of money needed and how we connect them to projects? I have ideas, but I really want to hear how you're thinking about that challenge.
Absolutely, and thank you, David, for having me. I know you're incredibly busy working on these and many other issues. The first thing to say is scale of the problem. Or scale of the issue, which is we need to effectively double spending investment on energy infrastructure for decades. So we're talking an extra $2.5 trillion of investment in energy infrastructure alone. And that's before the spending on resilience, adaptation, hard to abate sectors, other aspects. And about 3/4 of that spend will be in emerging and developing economies, as you know well. So these are big, big numbers, approaching 2% of global GDP. Where's the money going to come from? As you know, the bulk from the private sector. And let me just give you one figure and then hand back, which is what we've been working on is getting the best of the private sector committed to net zero transition. Big banks, insurers, asset managers, asset owners. The number as we speak today is $90 trillion of balance sheet committed for that. And that's not for some distant date. It's near-term 5-year commitments, fair share of the 50% reduction by 2030. So now the challenge is, how do we marry that capital, that commitment, with where it's needed most, channel it to those emerging and developing economies?
I just spoke with President Ivan Duque of the president of Colombia, and Colombia has an NDC that's interesting. It's to reduce by 50% from the baseline. So the baseline is for growth in greenhouse gas emissions, and it's going to be reduced by 50% by 2030. So it's a tall order. So I asked him, how do you finance that? And it means a lot of projects. So identifying the major emitters within Colombia, some of which are land use, for example, in addition to fossil fuels. How do you reduce that? And you can finance it somewhat by securitizing assets as they come available, by creating ways to subsidize or to add grant money, foundation money, for example, to a given project, working maybe with the World Bank or with the Inter-American Development Bank on a way to do a project. So it brings together all the sources of financing with the projects that are to be done. Can we discuss various new techniques that can be done through with you have huge expertise in that?
Well, I think the thing, and it's very exciting what President Duque and Colombia are doing, and I think this goes directly to where we can move the system. And as you well know, the World Bank has been developing and working hard on country platform approaches, and I think the opportunity is to extend them and blend in that very large scale of money I was just talking about, the 90 trillion from GFANZ. And what we need to have at the heart of it are two things, I think. One is the appropriate blended finance vehicles at scale. So think of the IFC's MCPP, is one great example of that. There are other examples. Those appropriate approaches. The right private sector forms of financing. CFLI is an example, fast infrastructure, a new example. These are proven methods that the private sectors come together for the format for project investing. But as well, I think with the imprimatur, if I may, of the World Bank and others to say that a program such as Colombia's is consistent with the transition the world needs, that unlocks an opportunity for the private sector, which is looking for exactly that type of net zero alignment, but really isn't on its own able to make those determinations independently, or else it's subject to greenwash and other concerns. So bringing all those elements, the best of blended finance of the World Bank and other MDBs, the best of private sector platform approaches, CFLI, Fast Infra as two examples. There are a few more that GFANZ has identified, but also connecting them with pure private finance that's consistent with the transition, such as the one you just discussed in Colombia.
Thanks. That's a great close. I want to thank Mark Carney for all the engagement here today. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, David, and thanks for everything you're doing.
Hello, I'm Naimul from Dhaka, Bangladesh, and you're watching the World Bank Group IMF annual meeting.
Thank you to David and his guests for those insights on turning climate ambition into reality. And the conversation didn't stop there. You can watch both full discussions using the link you should be able to see on your screens right now. We are streaming this event in English, Spanish, French, Arabic on World Bank Live and on our social media channels. And to tell us a little more about how to get involved, I'm joined by my colleague Shri Sridhar. Welcome, Shri.
Thanks, Miriam.
So can you please tell us a little more about how people can get involved and what else is ahead of us?
Yeah, so you mentioned our social media channels, and we are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can share your comments at any time using the hashtag for today's event, which is Voices for Climate. You can also post questions and comments directly on live.worldbank.org. So a lot of ways for folks to really, get engaged and join the conversation. You did mention that the event is being streamed in English, Spanish, French, and Arabic, and we actually have live expert bloggers standing by in all 4 languages to answer as many questions as possible. And the really cool thing is that some of the most popular questions that come in have a chance of being asked, I think, by some of the senior experts later today.
Correct, yes. So we will be joined by Axel van Trotzenburg, Managing Director for Operations at the World Bank, and Stefan Elliott, who is our Senior Advisor at the World Bank Group Climate team.
Great.
Well, I also understand we are asking people to take part in the quiz, right?
Yes. So today's quiz asks, when do you think global greenhouse gas emissions will start to go down? And there are 4 options. Have they already started to go down? Will they go down in 2030, in 2050, or will they never go down? So once more, the quiz today asks, when do you think emissions will start to go down? They already have started to go down. They'll go down in 2030, 2050, or never. So to take part in this quiz, head on over to live.worldbank.org and get your vote in before the quiz closes.
Thank you so much, Sri, and we will be coming back to you later for an answer.
Thanks, Miriam.
Well, next up, we are going to hear from several people about how best to advance the climate agenda. First, from Janet Yellen, Secretary of the United States Treasury.
Hi, everyone. I'm Janet Yellen, the U.S. Treasury Secretary. I want to thank President Malpass for the chance to say a few words about climate change and the United States' role in addressing this existential threat. As I record this video, a host of climate proposals are moving through our Congress. The President has proposed dotting the American landscape with 500,000 electric vehicle chargers and funding from fundamental R&D in nascent green technologies. But we also know that our efforts to address climate change cannot stop at the border. In July, when many of us met in Venice, I outlined the United States plan to double our public international climate finance to developing countries by 2024. Last month, President Biden went to the UN General Assembly and announced that we're doubling that number again. The United States has committed $11.4 billion per year, including financing for adaptation efforts. Indeed, as we approach COP26, there's renewed urgency for all nations to take the necessary steps toward the global goal of keeping warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. The multilateral development banks, as this group knows better than anyone, play a leading role here. They help emerging economies prioritize climate investments, integrate climate resilience into infrastructure planning, protect critical ecosystems, and increase climate ambition as part of their nationally determined contributions and long-term strategies. The United States is a large shareholder in the multilateral development banks, and we're committed to using our position of leadership to help facilitate a global transition toward net zero emissions by mid-century. In fact, I convened a meeting of the heads of the multilateral development banks over the summer, and I asked that each institution develop concrete plans to raise their climate ambitions and to identify specific ways they could each mobilize climate finance for developing countries. Of course, no amount of public financing alone will be sufficient to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. Private capital will be essential to fill the gap. As we work to mobilize this capital, we must continue to focus on addressing the ongoing challenges that emerging markets and developing countries face in attracting private sector financing, especially for greenhouse gas mitigation and adaptation infrastructure, and to reduce these impediments to investment. I look forward to our discussions over the coming week and hearing more from you on how we can move beyond our ambitions to definitive action.
Thank you to Madam Secretary for that message on the role of multilateral development banks in helping emerging economies to meet their climate ambition. I know that's something our next guest also feels strongly about. Let me welcome Axel van Trossenburg, World Bank Managing Director for Operations. Axel, we know we work a lot on identifying specific ways to help developing economies to meet climate targets, which really means rethinking how development and climate change intersect. How is the bank applying this thinking?
Well, climate is really affecting all our lives. And so we need to think not in an isolated way, well, climate, there is a problem with pollution, or there is a problem with weather-related events. You need to think more globally. And what we have been saying is, let's look at this comprehensively. And first, we want to understand the drivers of this well, but not in isolation, but in relation to development. And our latest climate change action plan includes the so-called country climate and development reports. It's precisely to address climate and development. Let's keep this in mind. The World Bank has its mission to reduce poverty, and we have made great progress. But climate change could undo some of this progress. In the worst case event, we could see an increase in extreme poverty throughout this decade by about 130 million people. We don't hope that that will happen, but it's fairly clearly related that you have climate and it can affect people. Therefore, we need to do this. So we bring this together, and then when we're looking at the drivers, we like the drivers not only to look at all the sectors, be it in the agriculture sector, forestry sector, what's with the services sector, what is also happening in the financial sector, but then also how certain policies can affect climate action, from fiscal policy to overall economic and sectoral policy. So that is how we try to bring this together. What's then ultimately important is that not only that we understand drivers, but that we do something about it. And here the bank has been scaling up its engagement. We had that a very strong last 5 years where we delivered over $83 billion in climate-related financing. Our intention in the next 5 years is to increase this by 50%. So what we are trying is really to scale this up, and we hope that everybody joins us.
Thank you so much, Axel. Thank you. Climate change may be a global challenge, but every country counts in this fight. We asked a climate activist from Vietnam to share her thoughts on how we can all play a part.
Last year, 2020, we experienced the worst drought and salinity in the Mekong Delta, the major rice producer of the country. Many farmers lost their crops. People carrying a lot of water containers and standing in super long line waiting to get or buy fresh water. Last year, people in central Vietnam went through record floods and typhoons back to back, causing hundreds of human lives and huge economic losses. There are many more people right now aware that, it's climate change. But most of them would say, well, there's nothing much I can do about it. Many NGOs, including mine, have been working with these amazing young people so that they can implement their own projects to address their own environmental and climate problems of the provinces. Also, business corporations are seeing more of their responsibility to contribute to a low-carbon, sustainable economic growth. But I think the best part is when the community, especially young people, are stepping up everywhere and taking the lead of the climate movement in the country. My vision for a successful climate action is where the movement is led by the community, by the young people, but is supported by everyone in the society. This climate change is too big, it's a huge crisis that would require everyone to work together.
Excellencies, colleagues, as COP26 approaches, it is essential for all humanity that we fulfill the promise of the Paris Agreement. That means reducing emissions by half by 2030 and achieving net zero emissions by mid-century so we can limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees from pre-industrial levels. It means providing and exceeding $100 billion a year to developing countries for climate action and shifting all financial flows to promote net zero emissions and resilient development. And it means protecting people from the impacts of climate disruption and allocating at least half of all public climate finance to adaptation. We are not yet there. Despite some recent encouraging announcements, I remain especially concerned over the lack of progress on public climate finance. Let us be very clear. $100 billion a year from public and private sources for mitigation and adaptation for the developing world is the bare minimum. Much more will be needed. And development banks have an essential role to play. We need you to spearhead the transition of energy systems from fossil fuels to renewables, while also ensuring universal access to energy. You must lead the way in supporting credible, just transition plans. And you must marshal efforts to fund green, resilient and inclusive recoveries without exacerbating the sovereign debt crisis that cripple low, middle-income countries. It is essential to avoid entrenching developing countries in high-carbon, fossil fuel-intensive investments with high stranded asset risks. And critically, you must encourage private finance at scale. Despite commitments made in Paris and repeated every year since, leverage ratios of multilateral development banks are nowhere near what is needed for transformative impact. Excellencies, let me turn now to adaptation and resilience. There are no other institutions better placed than development banks to fund adaptation needs. If multilateral, regional and other public development banks do not lead on this front, no one will. It is your responsibility to ensure that climate impacts will not jeopardize hard-won development gains. Years of work and trillions of dollars in investments are at risk. That is why I'm asking donor countries and multilateral development banks to allocate at least 50% of their climate finance to adaptation and resilience. Excellencies, friends, the clock is ticking. The world is growing anxious. We need your leadership, and I wish you a productive meeting, and I thank you.
What a great message from the UN Secretary General about why COP26 is so critical and what's at stake. Now, one of the critical ways to address the climate crisis is through what's called nature-based solutions or green infrastructure. Everything from mangroves on coastlines to green spaces in urban areas. Our next guest, His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, has long been a passionate advocate of the importance of nature and biodiversity. Here's what he had to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am enormously grateful to have been invited to join you for this year's annual meetings of the World Bank Group and the International Monetary Fund. As we look to build forward better from this pandemic, it is increasingly clear that human health, planetary health, and economic health are fundamentally interconnected. 77 years on from the Bretton Woods Conference, and with global threats now surpassing those we saw in the Second World War, we simply must seize the current window of opportunity to reimagine our global systems in a way that puts nature, people, and planet at the heart of how we operate. To consider how to do this and how to catalyze the trillions of dollars needed for transition, I convened a group of international CEOs to help develop a Terra Carta, a practical blueprint for practical action. The result identifies 3 key priorities. First, encouragement to governments to send clear market signals about long-term economic direction and the timelines involved to incentivize the achievement of climate, biodiversity, and just transition targets. This could helpfully include clear sustainability mandates for the multilateral development banks. Only with this kind of clarity can industries and investors alike have the confidence they need to channel the trillions of dollars at their disposal towards a sustainable future. Second, to meet the world's 1.5-degree target, we need to align industry, investment, and country transition roadmaps to build pipelines of investable and genuinely sustainable projects. Multilateral development banks have a critical role to play to help build technical capacity, mitigate risk, and improve the flow of private finance, particularly in the world's most climate vulnerable countries. Third, consumers control over 60% of global GDP, so they need clear information about the sustainability of products and services they are buying in order to make informed choices. This is starting to happen, be it through sustainably grown food, green transportation, sustainable fashion, or working for sustainable employers. Mandating global standards, including through internationally recognized labeling, would be transformational. Ladies and gentlemen, to seize this moment of acceleration, we simply must work together across public, private, and philanthropic sectors to build a pipeline of transformative projects at scale that can help us rapidly transition to a sustainable future. Leveraging the private sector's estimated $145 trillion in assets under management, projected by 2025, will be key to our collective success. Here, the World Bank, the IMF, and regional multilateral development banks have a crucial role to play in removing the risk barrier to private finance and investment. I'm afraid it is time to roll up our sleeves and detail our plan of actions. In particular, I would like to encourage that we look at accelerating private finance, including through first and second loss guarantee pools, advancing systems-level solutions, including by looking at governance and mandates, and enhancing technical and operational capacity, including preparing projects for investment. With action on climate change, biodiversity loss, and a just transition more urgent than ever, I can only encourage us all to get to work and sort this problem out.
Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, time is running out for the 1.5-degree target. Our challenges are huge. The COVID-19 pandemic, extreme poverty, persistent conflicts, the climate crisis. If we don't change course, global temperatures will increase to 2, maybe 3 degrees Celsius by the end of century. We still have a chance to go green. We have the knowledge and the technologies to address these crises. We also have the resources. Many countries are planning massive investments to restart their economies, but only 10% of the recovery programs target resilience and green investments. That is why we started the Green Recovery Initiative. We work together with the World Bank, Austria, and the UK. To strengthen this initiative, Germany will provide an additional 60 million euro. The initiative will support a global transformation through policies that put a price on carbon and phase out fossil fuel subsidies, targeted private investments in renewable energies, green infrastructure, and nature-based solutions. We cannot wait any longer to fight climate change. Concrete actions for such a global transformation are key for a successful COP26.
Bambul, Unakushe, and Cabo. I am Moses Alex Cabo in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and you're watching the World Bank IMF annual meetings.
A huge thank you to Minister Gerd Müller for this message. I'm joined now by Stefan Ellegatt, who is a senior advisor to the World Bank climate change team. Stefan, it feels like every day there is another climate news, whether it's record-breaking heat or wildfires to devastating floods and hurricanes. So, and this is impacting people across the world. Is this something we should be really this surprised about?
No, we're not surprised about this. Actually, this is what was expected decades ago already. Even a minor change in the average climate can have a huge impact on extreme events. So if you look at heat waves, heavy rainfall or wildfires, we see already a lot of difference in the frequency and intensity. And as you said, everybody is affected, but for us here at the World Bank, what really matters is the fact that poor people are more affected than the rest, and that these extreme events increase poverty. Today, we estimate that the natural disasters already push 26 million people per year in poverty. And if we look at 2030, it's up to 130 million people that could fall in poverty just because of climate change.
Well, those are really shocking numbers. So is it all just bad news? Are there things we can do?
Well, the first thing is, if poverty explains vulnerability, it means that when we take people out of poverty, we make them less vulnerable and we reduce the impact of climate change. So richer people with better savings, better access to healthcare, financial inclusion and so on, can better adapt and cope. So our mission here, reducing poverty, is also a mission to reduce the vulnerability of this population and make them less vulnerable. Of course, this is over the short run. If you look at the long term, we also need to stabilize climate change and reduce carbon emissions.
So broadly, all countries have committed to tackle climate change, and on both sides of it, reducing emissions and making people less vulnerable to it. So what needs to be done and what comes first?
So the first thing to know is that to stabilize climate change, so to stop the increase in temperature, carbon emissions need to go to zero. So we're not talking about a reduction by 10 or 20%. Now we're talking about a radical change going to zero. And of course, that makes the challenge look daunting, extremely difficult. And yes, it is difficult. But what we'll try to convince everybody today is that it is possible to do it, and it is easier than it looks. And it's easier if we cut the problem into pieces. So let's start with energy. We know energy is critical for development. It's critical for modern technologies, quality of life, growth, and productivity. Still today, 800 million people don't have access to electricity. So we have a major development challenge here. At the same time, energy is responsible for 70% of carbon emissions globally. So this is also a climate challenge. So here, this is a combination of a climate and development challenge we have in front of us.
Stand up, Stefan. Let's take a look at the data now and see how different sectors contribute to this total. Let's just take a look at the line which shows a contribution of electricity and heat.
So this is almost 16 billion tons of CO2 equivalent per year already today.
Next up, transport, effectively how we move around the cities and across countries.
So in this one you see almost a straight line going up.
And lastly, manufacturing and construction. So looking at this, clearly energy is the biggest part.
Yeah, and those three lines need to go to zero. So how do we make that happen? So the first thing is to make electricity without emitting carbon. And we can do that by investing massively in renewable energy. It's the first thing we can do. So that's solar, wind, geothermal. And the good news is the costs of those technologies have dropped so much recently that this is cheaper than fossil fuels today. So we can invest in renewable, and it's affordable now. In parallel, we have to exit from fossil fuels in electricity generation. That's the second thing we need to do. And that we have to do it very carefully, because first, we have to keep the stability of the system. And second, some communities are very dependent on coal. And if we want a just transition, we need to invest in those communities to make sure they can transition away from coal and find other livelihoods, other economic activities.
So, right, this is cleaning up our power systems. What next?
So as we go towards zero carbon electricity, we have to use much more of this electricity. So it's using electric buses, electric cars to move around, using heat pumps to heat our homes, and also cooking with electricity, for instance. And when we can't use electricity, like for heavy industries, we have to find other carbon-free fuels like hydrogen that we produce with renewable energy. And by the way, this would go a long way solving air pollution challenges that we face today. We're doing it. We're going in that direction. But it would be much easier if we're very efficient in how we use energy. And that's the fourth thing we have to do. We have to have our buildings well insulated. We have to use public transit more than individual cars. And our industries have to be more efficient. And if we do that, it's also good for development because it's paying less for energy, it's more productivity, it's more jobs.
Thank you, Stefan. Please stand by. Now, let's start our journey around the world and take a closer look at what the energy transition looks like in 3 very different countries.
India is rapidly urbanizing. Urban India is at the heart of a growing India. But this throws up very important questions about the kind of energy choices we are making. They are crucial decisions that India needs to take over this next decade that will lock us into energy transition. For India to be able to build a low-carbon industrial revolution, it needs international support, and this support is not just technological support, but also financial cooperation to enable India to build the institutional capacity, the technical capacity, and the public support for the transitions it needs to take. We are standing here today right in front of a metro station. This metro station is largely supported through renewable energy, so it's about the kind of energy that you are deploying, but it's also about how the transportation systems are located in ways that ensure that the bulk of people use them, so we exit our cars and enter the public transportation system. Climate change is a huge challenge, but it is also a significant opportunity to rethink what it means to build an economic growth trajectory that is sustainable, that is long-term, that is inclusive. This is a domestic challenge and a global challenge, and a time for the international community to come together.
Na nafanya kazi ya kinyozi pamoja na duka nikiwa mtaani Tezo. Wameka kuko na sola, kuko na taa, na sasa nikaonelea afadhali nichukue sola kwa sababu hakuna hata stima yenye tunaweza fanya kitu kama hiyo. Wako na mashine nzuri yenye ambayo naweza nikatumia, nikaonelea afadhali nichukue sola. Sola nimetumia kwa kuchaji kinyozi. Kinyozi natumia kunyoa. So sola ni kama imenisaidia na kinyozi. Nimepata kinyozi na sasa nimefanya kazi. Hiyo inanirahisishia kazi. Kwanza nilikuwa nikichukua muda mrefu na kunyoa inakuwa vigumu kutumia kidembe. Kwanza utasikia mtu anasikia maumivu. Na imeniongezea pia wakati wa kufanya kazi, maana nafanya kazi mpaka late hours kama hapo saa 2 usiku ndo nafunga.
Transformacja energetyczna dotknie branży węgla brunatnego, przede wszystkim pracowników grupy kapitałowej ZE-PAK, gdzie zatrudnienie jest 4000 pracowników. Żeby transformacja była skuteczna i sprawiedliwa, to przede wszystkim należy zapewnić pracownikom zatrudnienie, utworzenie nowych miejsc pracy, przekwalifikowanie pracownika. Należy również pamiętać o tym, że była podana data odejścia od węgla, jak również podane koszty sprawiedliwej transformacji związane z lokalną społecznością. Współpraca z lokalnymi samorządowcami, ze związkami zawodowymi, z pracodawcami, z lokalną społecznością ma sens i to bardzo duży.
We are reminded of the importance that this process is what we call just.
Z względu, że widzimy, klimat się zmienia, ocieplenie jest bardzo duże, co mieliśmy i musimy robić wszystko, aby tutaj jednak, żebyśmy żyli w tym środowisku czystym. Apeluję jako Polka do całego świata. Dbajmy o planetę, ale dbajmy również o człowieka. Wówczas transformacja będzie skuteczna, sprawiedliwa, a przede wszystkim będzie miała ludzką twarz.
Indeed, a message from Poland to the world is that this transition is about bringing people and communities along. And we will be continuing our journey to Jordan, Niger, Uganda in just a few moments. If you have just joined us, I'm Miriam Gray, and we are discussing how we can make climate action count. Remember, you can share your thoughts at any point using #VoicesForClimate. Our senior climate change advisor, Stefan Elliger, joins me again. Stefan, obviously energy is a critical part of it, but that's not the only system which requires transformation. So what else is mission critical?
So it might sound a bit obvious, but to bring emissions to zero, we need all sources of emissions to go to zero. So energy is really important, but another one that's really critical is food and land use. And this is really important because a lot of people in poverty are farmers, but also because the world population is growing and we need to provide food to this population, and this food needs to be good and nutritious, but also affordable. A lot of poor people are spending more than half of their income on food, so they are very sensitive to increase in food prices. But we have to do that while preserving forests and ecosystem. We want to preserve them because we want to protect biodiversity, because they are some of the most beautiful places on Earth, but also because those ecosystems take carbon out of the atmosphere and help us meet our goals in terms of climate change.
So let's take a look at the data again. So here we have a graph that we saw earlier showing how energy contributes to global emissions. Now let's add a line for agriculture. Look at this, it's almost as much as manufacturing. And also let's add a line to show the contribution of land use. So, Stefan, if you look at this, what can be done to reduce these emissions from food and land use?
So first, you really have to look at those two lines together because those problems are very closely connected. And again, there will be no magical solution, but we know what needs to happen. And the first thing that needs to happen is that we need to protect the forest and ecosystem, as I said, and if possible, also let them regrow, because that is capturing carbon from the atmosphere. But if we do only that, the risk is to increase food prices. And so in parallel, the second thing we have to do is to increase agricultural productivity. And to do that, we need to change agricultural practices to make them more efficient and more sustainable. For instance, we have to grow the right crops in the right places and the right climate, and we have to use nutrients and water in a very efficient way adapted to the local conditions.
So what you're saying is that we need a combination of more productive agriculture and protecting ecosystems that can help us deal with food security issues and biodiversity and climate protection.
Yes, and like always, efficiency will be critical. So the third thing is not to waste food. We have all been told as kids that we should not waste food. It's true, but it's also true to protect the climate. And today we're really losing too much of the food we produce. The fourth thing we need to do is to use water very carefully and also to protect the ecosystems that are contributing to maintaining the quality of that water that we consume. And the last thing, the fifth thing, and it's again a good news, is healthier diets can not only make us live longer and healthier, but also reduce the impact of agriculture on the climate. So those healthier diets are also good for the environment.
Thank you, Stefan. Please stand by. Let's go back to our journey around the world. This time we asked 3 people to share their solutions for agriculture, land use and water.
Our beautiful country is very rich in many resources, but Jordan is ranked as the second or third poorest country in terms of water resources. We have enough water for 2 million people, but currently the population is in excess of 10 million. In terms of climate change, Jordan used to receive about 5 to 8 billion cubic meters of rainfall, but we currently receive about 3 billion. And as a result of high temperatures, 90% of that water evaporates. The most important example of this is the beautiful Dead Sea. The level of water is shrinking by about half a meter per year. There are a lot of solutions that the government is currently working on. Jordan is a real success story when it comes to renewables. 10 years ago, several kilowatts of renewable energy were produced. Today, we are talking about in excess of 3,000 megawatts from solar and wind that provides clean, green, and cheap energy. You can use renewables to reduce the CO2 emissions and to reduce the cost of piping and pumping water projects. I think we're on the right track. My hopes are that we move in high gear and we move very quickly on implementing water solutions.
Nous assistons à des inondations répétitives et ça affecte le pays. Il y a également une prolifération de maladies climato-sensibles. On assiste à des cas de choléra, des cas de méningite qui reviennent. Présentement, il y a beaucoup d'aléas qui affectent à la fois les communautés et les systèmes de production. Il y a l'amélioration de la résilience des systèmes agro-silvopastoraux. Il y a eu la combinaison de mesures de gestion durable des terres et de l'eau. Ces actions ont permis d'accroître la productivité, d'accroître les revenus de sécurité alimentaire, d'intrants agricoles et d'aliments bétail. Ensuite, il y a le réapprovisionnement des stocks à partir des marchés locaux, à l'énergie, à des biens de première nécessité qui sont fabriqués localement. Il est nécessaire de voir une mise à échelle avec les succès et les nouvelles avenues qui sont ouvertes par ce projet-là.
Ever since I started to work, we've been having a challenge of drought. 99% of the farmers in Chegegwa, they depend on agriculture. Climate change has impacted on them. The farmer makes the decision on what he wants. These are essential farmers. These are farmers who really need irrigation, who want to shift from subsistence to commercial. It is really looking at the farmer who has been struggling, and if the government just push a little, this farmer can be somewhere. So we set up this demonstration garden to show farmers different technologies. So a farmer would move from sprinkler to drip, and he sees how the irrigation technology is, then he goes to drag a hose. So then the farmer knows what he wants. But we faced a challenge. We were hit by the hailstorm. We are trying to plan again how we can come up again. But we are not going to give up. We are going to support. We are going to move together, and we make sure that our farmers come and learn. Some had lost hope, but now they are gaining back with the project.
Xin chào, I'm Huyền in Hà Nội, Việt Nam, and you're watching the World Bank Group IMF annual meetings.
In this last video, Annette Nikide makes a great point about water scarcity. This is a sector that is particularly prone to climate change impacts. Stefan, let's talk about how communities can strengthen their resilience.
So all communities, all countries will be affected by climate change, and we already see some of those impacts. So they all need to be better prepared. What do we need to do? So the first thing, as we discussed before, poverty is a big driver of vulnerability. So reducing poverty, taking people out of extreme poverty is really a big priority. But it won't be enough. We also need to do more. So the second thing is to help people and firms adapt, because people and firms, they want to adapt. Nobody likes to be flooded or to lose income, but they face obstacles. Sometimes they lack the information, sometimes technologies, sometimes they don't have access to financing. We have to tackle those obstacles to let people and firms adapt. And because we have to acknowledge that there will always be disasters, there will always be impacts, we have also to provide people and firms tools to recover when they are affected. So it will be adaptive social protection to help populations, or like insurance or access to borrowing for firms. The third thing is a responsibility of governments, including local governments, and it's our infrastructure, our cities, the way we use land use. Today we have no excuse. We should not build any building or any piece of infrastructure that is not adapted to the climates and risks of today, but also the climate and the risk of tomorrow. So this is a really important part of the equation. And finally, the fourth point is to tackle the macroeconomic impact of those climate change consequences. Governments can do a lot, for instance, by diversifying their economy, but also diversifying their tax base, so that when there is a shock, they have the resources to cope and recover.
Right, absolutely. In fact, our next guest actually spoke about adaptation and shared his hope for what he would like to see on this front. Let's take a listen.
The recent sixth assessment report of Working Group 1 of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has very clearly stated that we have now entered unequivocally into a climate changed world because of the temperature increase over 1 degree centigrade compared to pre-industrial times. Therefore, we have now entered the era of loss and damage from climate change. What we want to see from our leaders going up to COP26 and every single day, not just once a year, is actions commensurate with the crisis and emergency we are in. There is nowhere near enough action at the scale that is required. All our leaders need to take it seriously, need to take actions immediately, and not just the political leaders, but leaders of companies, leaders of cities, towns, villages, and every single citizen on the planet now needs to take climate change seriously as the emergency that it is. And now we need action every single day, everywhere in the world, from everyone.
That's a great message from Salim Haq, and it really begs the question, how can countries afford to do all this? Many of these investments, after all, need to happen in countries which are among the world's poorest, and certainly all countries have been affected by COVID-19. So how these transitions are going to be financed, Stefan?
So those investments, over the long term, they will pay for themselves. When we spend $1 in the resilience of infrastructure, we avoid $4 in losses later on. When you pay for a solar panel, you don't have to pay for the fuel. So over the long run, it might be easy. But the problem is, of course, that you have to invest to start with. And this upfront cost, very high upfront cost, is really the challenge we have. So this is, before everything, a financing challenge. And yes, we're talking about trillions, so it's impressive. But we have to keep in mind we're already investing trillions of dollars every year. So the question is not so much investing more, it's making sure we invest better, that we invest in projects which are not only good projects and profitable projects, but also projects that are resilient and sustainable. This is a challenge.
How are we going to make it happen?
So the first thing is the set of policies, prices, regulations that you have in an economy. So we have been discussing about the regulation of the financial sector, for instance. We have been discussing about fossil fuel subsidies and how they bring investment into fossil fuels. All of those signals need to change to make sure all investments, domestic and international, public and private, are going to the right projects, which are projects driving us toward net zero. And the long-term signal when countries commit to achieve net zero in 2050 or 2060 are also very important because they help drive R&D investment and other investments. But this won't be enough. For poor countries, especially affected by COVID, they will need help. And climate finance, the resources that rich countries can bring to help them, will play a critical role to pay that upfront costs. And there are also specific instruments. For instance, green technologies tend to be considered more risky than traditional ones. So we can create specific instruments with guarantees or other de-risking tools to attract the private sector and make sure they also invest in those technologies. And finally, public finance will play a key role, and that's especially for the most basic infrastructure, and also to help the poorest communities, which will always struggle to attract private investors.
Right, so we actually asked Alan Jope, the CEO of Unilever, and Chris Sacca, founder and chairman of Low Carbon Capital, for their thoughts on how the private sector sees the climate challenge.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak about the role of the private sector in turning ambition into reality. Climate change and its impacts matter to business. In addition to the tragic human and social costs, we are seeing all over the world how systemic shocks are disrupting value chains and acting as a downward pressure on global growth. Yet here we are still careering towards a world that is 3 degrees warmer. So looking to COP26 and beyond, the world must deliver a global response that matches the scale of the climate challenge. Of course, governments must commit to credible national plans that keep the Paris Agreement's 1.5 degree limit within reach. And business must also do our part to deliver that ambition. At Unilever, Successful climate action starts with getting our own house in order. For example, our operations around the world are now powered by 100% renewable grid electricity, and our CO2 emissions are down by 75% per tonne of production versus our 2008 baseline. We're also investing in natural climate solutions to address both the climate and nature emergencies together. In fact, we're finding that delivering our climate goals also lowers operational costs and increases the resilience of our value chain. But no business can tackle climate change alone, and most emissions in a value chain usually come from outside a company's direct operations. And that's why during New York Climate Week we launched the Unilever Climate Promise. And that's an invitation to our suppliers to join us in delivering our ambitious climate transition action plan goals. And through such value chain and sectoral approaches, we believe that we can scale the private sector's actions for more impact. The business case for climate action is clear, and the role of the private sector in the low carbon transition is going to be crucial. And on that note, thank you again for letting me share my thoughts on this very important topic.
I'm Chris Sacca, founder of Lower Carbon Capital. We're one of the world's most active backers of companies and organizations working to solve the climate crisis. And I'm here with some good news. It's gonna work. The global economy will be decarbonized. Why? Well, I mean, it's self-interest. Compare a traditional energy source, digging up and burning old dinosaur bones, to these days when it's just plain cheaper and safer to power our economy with the sun. And we're seeing this play out across energy, agriculture, and transport. I mean, you name it. But just getting to zero emissions is not enough. The latest IPCC report is clear. We also need to suck carbon pollution back out of the atmosphere. And that's going to take a lot of time and money, and it's a great space for government to be helpful. Because overall, we don't get to choose one or the other. We have to both reduce emissions and capture carbon. And if we do, Earth will come back into balance. But here's the problem. None of that can possibly happen big enough and fast enough to avoid disaster. Now look, I'm a professional optimist, but anyone who's telling you we can get all this done by 2030 is just out of touch with reality. So we need to buy the planet some time. How? Well, there's some science we can all fund today, and cheaply and quickly, that'll have a massive impact. And that science is sunlight reflection. And it's really our only shot of staving off tragedy until the clean economy and carbon removal can catch up. Because hanging in the balance are the lives of hundreds of millions of the world's most vulnerable people. Now, many of us here are able to escape the drought and the famine and the war that result from the climate crisis. And that is the ultimate privilege. But with that privilege comes the moral responsibility for all of us to help others who aren't as lucky. Yes, we must keep reducing emissions and pulling carbon out of the sky. That'll work. But in the meantime, sunlight reflection research can save millions of lives. And let's start by backing the scientists based in the countries where the local people are most at risk. We owe it to them. And we owe it to each other.
So we've already heard from Vietnam, India, Kenya, Poland, Niger, Uganda, and Jordan. Last, we are taking you to Brazil and Cameroon.
In Brazil, we see that issues like scarcity of drinking water, unprecedented floods and droughts, rising sea levels, and food insecurity are increasing. In northeastern Brazil, arid and semi-arid areas are already impacted and will suffer even more with the reduction of water resources available for daily activities. What is critical for us to succeed in this challenge is to understand that it affects all of us. The solution also needs to be collective. Companies, governments, and civil society in general must understand the need to be more serious about climate change, as our existence depends on it. We need to work together as a team to raise awareness and have a successful climate action. One of the paths we need to accelerate is putting climate change at the forefront for the business agenda. In the case of sanitation companies, it is crucial that they, together with other industries, understand the importance of climate change and water scarcity. We must understand the connection between business and nature, and by extension, between sustainable development and environmental preservation, and how a low-carbon economy can still generate wealth, security, and prosperity for all.
In 2030, we want to see 45% of reduction of greenhouse gases and also a reduction of global warming by 1.5. To reach those goals, the first thing is to have a better collaboration between the different climate action. You know, alone we can go really quickly, but together we can go really far. The second thing is to promote protection environment actions. For example, sensitize people in their today climate action on their children tomorrow life. We should encourage and invest in circular economy, which is really important, and also in sustainable solutions. For example, here in Cameroon, we have a great solution that promote banana production waste, which is stems into biodegradable packaging. You know, this kind of suitable climate actions will reduce deforestation and on our way empowering rural women. Thank you.
Really exciting to see so much potential to drive a new climate economy. Turning our attention back to the big climate moment that is coming up in 2 weeks, we asked Alok Sharma, the COP26 president, for his vision for success and what he would like to see happen.
In a matter of days, the world will meet in Glasgow for COP26. This will be the most important UN climate conference there's been for years. And the reason it is so important is that time is running out to limit the rise in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees, as the world committed to do in the Paris Agreement, which said we would limit temperature rises to well below 2 degrees, aiming for 1.5. Delivery of this goal requires finance. So a key focus of the UK's COP presidency is to get public and private finance flowing to climate action. And absolutely, there has been some progress. Every major MDB is now committed to putting between 30 and 50% of their lending towards climate projects. And we are seeing increase in adaptation finance too, with the World Bank and the African Development Bank committing to a balance between adaptation and mitigation lending. Development banks are coming up with new ways of retiring and replacing coal, ensuring a just transition. Almost every MDB has committed to align their financing with the Paris Agreement by 2025, or indeed earlier, with some already there. And the IMF's historic SDR allocation has given countries more funds to support green recoveries worldwide. As I said, we have seen progress, but there is much further to go, particularly in using public funds to mobilize private finance at greater scale than ever before. This, my friends, is urgent. So I ask all MDBs, governments and private institutions here today to come to COP26 with a plan of action to invest more, to mobilize more and to finance more in order to deliver the critical action that we need in this decisive decade for climate. Thank you.
A big thank you to Alok Sharma for the look ahead. And if you want to learn more about the World Bank Group's work on climate in the run-up to COP26, take a look at the resources section on World Bank Live site. I'm joined again by my colleague Shri Sridhar. Hi Shri. So you've been looking and monitoring social media. So what did stood out for you?
Thanks, Miriam. Yes, so today people have been using the hashtag Voices for Climate, and they've been commenting from all over the world, including Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, India, the United Kingdom, Mexico, Uganda, Jordan, Germany, and also the United States. But what are they talking about? So they're talking about how climate impacts are already happening where they live, but they're also talking about possible solutions and how projects to lower carbon emissions and also combat climate change. Now, we've also been monitoring the conversation across our different social media platforms. So let me give you a flavor of what people are saying there. On LinkedIn, we have Scott Andrew Campbell, who says that he believes climate action is the most important approach for creating a resilient recovery, and that failure to act will only increase the severity of extreme weather systems, which cost billions in relief aid that could be spent making people's lives better. On Facebook, Rasopilo says that the climate crisis in Madagascar is mostly the effect of bushfires, and that the only solution is sustainable agriculture and reforestation. Finally, to round things out, on Instagram, Stacey Mwende says that greenhouse gas emissions will start to go down anytime industries start to take action. And I think her comment here is really a great segue into talking about our quiz today, right?
Right, I feel like we need a little bit of a drum beat here. Yes, so I believe you do have results, right?
I do. So let me tell you about the quiz. We had 4,072 people take today's quiz, and we asked, when do you think emissions will start to go down? Now, the options were, have they already started to go down? Will they go down in 2030, in 2050, or will they never go down? Now, before I reveal the correct answer, let's see how people individually voted for each one of these options. Now, with 22.3%, people said that they already have started to go down. 37.4% of folks say that it'll go down in 2030. 24.1% say 2050, and 16.2% of people think that it will never go down. Now, what is your vote here?
I was going with never.
Never?
But clearly tricky question.
Yeah, so the correct answer here is actually A, they already have started to go down. And,
yes.
I think it's also important to note that this is, very much reflective of this moment in time, right?
Okay, all right, yeah, and in fact, I think this number is probably reflective of this downward trend triggered by COVID lockdowns, and the economy is basically struggling. But what we need to find really is the way to reduce emissions that don't hurt communities and people, and they're sustainable in the longer term.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Shri.
Thanks, Mariam.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Aslam from Islamabad, Pakistan, and you are watching the World Bank Group IMF annual meetings.
Hello, I'm Ruth Moyam in Markham, Papua New Guinea, and you're watching the World Bank Group IMF annual meetings.
Okay, now to answer some of the questions we've been asking, I'm pleased to welcome Axel van Trossenburg, World Bank Managing Director for Operations, and our Senior Advisor, Stefan Elligot. He's a Senior Advisor with the Climate Change Group. So, Axel, my first question to you. Earlier we spoke, you mentioned that climate and development being connected and how climate change and development reports are basically forthcoming. But the bank has been connecting these dots for a very long time. So how has this been working out in practice?
Well, in practice is that we translate that into our country programs, and they have to be really tailor-made to individual country situations. In the aggregate, to keep that in mind, is we have been scaling up our climate financing for the last 5 years over about $83 billion. We want to go 50% higher in the next 5 years. And that translates really in challenges whether you are in a middle-income country or a low-income country. Take Africa. Africa is not producing in a major way greenhouse gas emissions. They are only responsible for less than 4% of world emissions, yet they are disproportionately affected. Look at the Sahel zone. So you need to have tailor-made solutions for people living in the Sahel zone or in urban areas. In other areas where we are with urbanization, with massive emissions, what can we do by having more transport smart systems in place? So what we are seeing is we are translating that in concrete project from agriculture to urban, but also to policies, because sometimes you have the wrong policies. Take, for example, fuel subsidies that actually promote a lot of fuel use. If we can reduce that, that may have an also very positive effect. So it is the combination of these interventions that can make a difference. Alone we cannot do it. Climate change is the ultimate goal, that this is a global responsibility, and globally we will be only able to solve it. Therefore you have also the so-called COP26, this COP process where you bring the world community together. We are one part of it, from a multilateral part of it, but you need to work with governments, you need to work with the private sector, you need to work with also multilateral organization, and only together we can do it.
Thank you. So my next question for Stefan. Stefan, we actually have great questions coming from the audience. Let's hear from Fotios Kalanits, who sent us this video. Let's take a listen.
I'm Fotios Kalanits in Luxembourg, and my question is, how can we make sure that the transformation needed to tackle climate change will not lead to increasing inequalities within and across countries and sectors?
Over to you, Stefan.
Well, this is a really important question, but I think we have to start from climate change itself and the fact that if we don't act, climate change itself will increase inequalities. Among countries, we see that poor countries are more affected, and also within countries with people in poverty being disproportionately affected too. So we have to implement policies to correct this impact on inequalities. Climate action to reduce emissions can reduce inequalities or increase them. It's all a question of how they are designed. And Axel mentioned the role of fossil fuel subsidies. If you increase the price of energy, of course it will hurt people in poverty. But with all of the resources that you save doing that, or the money you collect with carbon pricing, you have resources that you can use to protect the poorest or make them better off. And countries like Indonesia or Jordan have done exactly that. They improved the incentives to reduce emissions, and they helped people in poverty so that they reduced inequality. So if you design them well, you can do both things at once.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. And we actually sent another video question from Gabriel Babadi. Let's take a look, Axel.
I'm Gabriel Babadi from Chonchon in Republic of Korea. And my question is, how can least developed countries contribute to climate action?
Well, that's over to you, Axel.
Well, I think they can, the least developed can take action, namely take action. And particularly think of those of countries that have still not too much electricity. So often the electrification rates are very low in this. So how can you have a strategy that permit more access to electricity, but then go more on the renewable side? So you can actually have a win-win situation where you actually look at a more renewable strategy and have also access to electricity. That's, for example, one example. The other thing is, I mentioned this earlier, the desertification. Maybe one has a possibility through community-driven development programs, particularly involving women and so, how you could actually design projects that are allowing for sustainable agriculture, but also protecting forests there. So you need there to design this, and where people in the communities can contribute directly to climate. That's another important lesson. We need to involve communities. We need to get everybody involved in this. It cannot just be just a government or one actor. It will need to involve all. And that is also the key to success in Africa and other low-income countries.
Stefan, our next question is from Nigeria. So Aken Akawe from Nigeria asked another one of the top questions we received. How will the youth take the driver's seat in this campaign? Young people are impressively committed to climate action, but they often feel discouraged because of the amount of work that needs to be done. So what can we focus on to remain positive?
So, I mean, young people today are really well informed, very aware of the climate challenge. So I don't think they need me or anyone else to tell them what to do. But I want to answer on the discouragement question, because that's a little bit what we try to do with this event, is to show that this change is difficult, it is ambitious, but it is possible, and we know where to go. We have a strategy to achieve zero net emissions. And one of the big obstacles on the way is discouragement. I was in a high school recently and asking if they believed we will manage to reduce emissions to zero. Not one of them in the classroom said yes. If we don't believe we can do it, we won't do it. So it's really important to keep in mind that it is a challenge, but we have solutions. We have talked about them, and we should be able to do it if we get to work and we implement. And by the way, this is true for climate, but if you think about poverty eradication, it's also one of our big objectives. And it's the same thing. If we believe we can do it and we invest in it and we implement, we can do it in the next decade.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Axel. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So we hope you've enjoyed this journey with us. We really wanted to bring down different stories, perspectives, solutions that are helping us to tackle the climate crisis. And there is still a lot to watch back about this event as well as previous ones on economic growth and ending pandemic. And we'll be back tomorrow with last public event in these annual meetings on the role of trade in supporting economic growth. This is all at live.worldbank.org. And to bring us to a close, today we asked young activists, students and climate champions who gathered a few weeks ago at a Youth Climate Summit to tell us what they want to see happen at COP26 in Glasgow.
Dear leaders.
Dear leaders.
Dear leaders, the world is watching.
At COP26, I want to see you cede decision-making power to those with lived experiences of the climate chaos.
I want you to increase climate finance for adaptation, for loss and damage, and for mitigation.
I want to see you provide billions of dollars of grants to developing countries.
I want to see you commit to 1.5.
To abolish fossil fuels by 2030.
Bring forward female voices.
Create a new normal.
And to stick to your promises instead of making new ones.
I want to see that the perspective of indigenous and local communities is incorporated in the indices.
You must adopt the Paris Rulebook and place the most vulnerable in the center of your decisions.
I want to see action, ambition.
I want you to hear young people's voices on how we can create a more sustainable future together.
And promote social justice.
It's too late to turn a blind eye.
We see you. Do you see us?
What has been done until now?
Please, make the decision based on your conscience.
Set your sights high.
Show us what real action looks like.
The eyes of the world are on COP26.